My name is Mary MacGregor-Reid. I'm an artist and I have a very long-standing interest in the occult, particularly in the area of Western Esotericism. Now, this isn't my academic area. I do have a master's degree, but it's in fine art, not in history. This knowledge about the occult I'm sharing today is something I've accrued over time through my own study and my experience with the various systems in Western Esoterica. And I don't think that being skeptical or rational precludes one from interest and exploration of this fascinating area of esotericism. There are magical practices all over the world involving ritual, incantation, altered states, etc. But in the West, which is obviously my heritage, occultism mainly describes the Western esoteric tradition. It's a vast area that incorporates many different ideas and has woven itself into the history of religion and of science throughout Europe and the Near East, particularly in the Mediterranean. The word occult in the present day has come to encompass anything people can think of that involves supernatural weirdness. So magic, sorcery, ghosts, demons, ritual, and a host of basically weird phenomena outside of the everyday. From my point of view, all that supernatural ooky spooky stuff is not occult, it is just spooky. The word occult as a descriptive means hidden. To occult something is to hide it, and that is the crux of what occultism is as a practice. Knowledge is not just hidden from the outside world, it is also hidden from the practitioner themselves until such a time when he or she can comprehend it. The esoteric tradition allows for experiential knowledge to unfold like a flower, revealing petal after petal. The whole closed rose cannot be observed in its entirety, it must be understood little by little as it blooms. Some people describe Western esotericism as the ideas that science discarded. I personally think that's a bit reductive, as many of these ideas emerged as the early forms of what modern science was to become. I also wonder at times whether any of them are still early forms of what science will quantify in the future. Today I will be using some words like God, divine, and magic, but try to see them as just useful placeholders we are all familiar with for things that don't have other suitable descriptors. Because this history is so large, I'm only going to touch on a few key areas that I think you might enjoy. If there are any historians in the room, please feel free to point out any errors I might make with my history at the end of the talk. So, with that in mind, let's travel all the way back to ancient Egypt. As you probably know, the ancient Egyptian civilization is understood to date back to around 3000 BCE, which is obviously a very long time ago, and ending around 30 BCE when Egypt was conquered by the Romans. Although their religion did change through those 3,000 years, the crux of the belief system stayed pretty much the same. The gods changed in status, but the primary figures endured. Funerary practices changed, but their core focus on the afterlife did not. Even when the pharaoh Akhenaten attempted to redirect worship to a single sun god, the people discarded this idea as soon as he died and went back to their old beliefs. Magic was a spiritual force known as Heka, which permeated all things, and magical ritual was completely ingrained in Egyptian life. Their art and writing were part of the same symbolic language, which not only conveyed meaning, but also spiritual ideas. The amazing symbology of Egyptian art and its depictions of gods and mortals is captivating for us even today. Some of the gods depicted here have been used throughout many systems as symbolic representations of esoteric ideas. So here we can see Horus, depicted as the hawk-headed god. In the middle here is the body of Nut, the sky goddess, arching over the ceiling of this tomb. And on the right-hand side, we see the serpent deity Mehen protecting a barge carrying Num, the ram-headed god of the Nile. While Greece had been trading with Egypt since around 1000 BCE, it wasn't until the Hellenistic period after the invasion of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE that the fusion of Greco-Egyptian culture and religion occurred. It was at this time the Greeks really began to get interested in the Egyptian gods. They had previously seen reflections in their own gods, so it wasn't too hard to blend them together. As a bit of an aside here, it's something that happens with a lot of different religions, particularly Catholicism. For example, in the Caribbean, West African voodoo deities were integrated with Catholic saints to create new versions of both. There is one god I want to talk about in particular, as he is a nexus of Western esotericism. This god is Jehuti, or Thoth to the Greeks, and you can see him on the right here with his beautiful ibis head and writing tools. This god was the one who held all the knowledge, knew all the ceremonial and ritual. He invented hieroglyphs. He was also a psychopomp in that he guided the dead to the afterlife and had the important task of recording the weight of the deceased's heart when weighed against a feather. This is what he's doing in this image alongside Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the underworld, and Ammit, the devourer of the dead. The goddess Ma'at is there too in the form of the scales. The cultural exchange happening in the Ptolemaic and Hellenistic period created syncretism between Greek and Egyptian religion. Greeks saw Jehuti and related him to their god Hermes, who was also associated with writing and knowledge, wisdom and magic. Out of this syncretism was born a mythical figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great. If you have heard the term Hermetic or Hermeticism as relates to the occult, then this is where it all started. Hermes Trismegistus is said to have written the Corpus Hermetica, a collection of philosophical and hermetic texts that form the basis of Hermeticism. The work Esoteric has its roots in ancient Greek. It comes from esoterikos, meaning belonging to an inner or secret circle. The kind of magic practiced by Hermetic philosophers is called theurgy, and it is expressly performed to experience divine knowledge and to comprehend the interconnectedness between all things. There is another kind of magic called thaumaturgy, which is described as practical magic because it is more focused on manipulating the material world. This tends to be the kind of occultism associated with the cult in the present day, like things that are made to actually change reality and to provide things for the magician. There were many other ideas that evolved in the early Common Era, which are relevant to the occult tradition. Alongside the pagan mystery cults, there are three very important philosophies: Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, and alchemy. Arising in around the 1st century, Gnosticism is typified by a belief in the attainment of gnosis or secret knowledge. Developed among Jewish and Christian sects, Gnostic texts often described a dualistic universe created by a flawed deity, with the true divine only reachable through this hidden Gnostic knowledge. This false deity is often described as the demiurge because of how it fashioned a material world separated from the true universal creator. The Gnostics believed that within every human lies a fragment of the true God, a divine spark which can be awakened through gnosis. Apocryphal texts like the Nag Hammadi library, found in 1945, and the Pistis Sophia revealed a lot about Gnostic ideas. This painting by Romantic artist William Blake is named The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun, which is a line from the Book of Revelations. It can be interpreted in a Gnostic manner, with the dragon representing the demiurge, a symbol of materialism and ignorance, oppressing the golden woman, representing Sophia, the Gnostic embodiment of divine wisdom. Towards the end of the Hellenistic period in the 3rd century CE emerged Neoplatonism, a philosophy which unsurprisingly drew from the works of the great philosopher Plato. At the heart of Neoplatonism is the concept of the One, an ultimate, transcendent source of all reality and existence, which is beyond all attributes and descriptions. Everything in the universe emanates from the One in a hierarchical or emanatory order. The first emanation is the nous, the divine mind, followed by the world soul, and finally the material world. The goal of human life, according to Neoplatonism, is to return to the One through philosophical contemplation and spiritual purification. Neoplatonism's emphasis on the unity of all existence and the ascent of the soul towards a transcendent source has left a lasting legacy on Western esotericism. In early Greco-Roman Alexandria, we see a huge melting pot brewing with the knowledge of many cultures coming together, including Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Jewish scholars. This cultural synthesis was crucial for the development of another kind of esoteric practice, alchemy. On this slide, we have two famous early alchemists. On the left, a bust of Zosimus of Panopolis, and on the right, a 17th century depiction of Mary the Jewess. Both of these characters were from the 4th century. If you've done much baking, you would have come across a piece of scientific and cooking equipment that bears her name. The bain-marie, or Mary's bath, a vessel inside another water-filled vessel used to maintain a gentle heat. Alchemy in Alexandria was not just about transforming base metals into gold, but also about spiritual transformation and enlightenment. Alchemists sought to understand the fundamental principles of the universe through a combination of scientific experimentation and mystical insight. They did not separate their chemical experiments from their spiritual pursuits because they believed what happens in the spiritual realm is also reflected in the material. Many people associate alchemy solely with the process of attempting to turn base metals, such as lead, into gold. But although they did carry out material experiments, this process is also a way to describe the desire to turn a base human into one who can reach communion with the divine. From our vantage point, we might scoff at their early attempts at chemistry, but they were making real scientific discoveries about the elements and the way chemical processes work. As far as the hidden or occulted knowledge goes, alchemical texts are the most perfect examples of this. Everything is coded and hidden in symbolic language, both written and pictorial. I'd like to share with you some examples of alchemical artworks to show how they clearly illustrate the way alchemical documents typify the concept of hidden knowledge. These ones here are from a large body of diagrams created in 1718, describing in symbolic code the alchemical process. Looking at these, you can see that they aren't just giving chemical instruction, although that is definitely in there, with the various animals and the birds representing physical processes, but they are also representing spiritual process. This is from the Donum Dei, meaning the most precious gift of God, and it includes a series of 12 beautiful instructive illustrations. It outlines the stages of the magnum opus, or the great work, which is the alchemical process of transformation. This includes the stages of nigredo, blackening, albedo, whitening, and rubedo, reddening. It personifies the process through the use of a king and queen as opposing but complementary forces. I've used this idea quite a lot in my artwork over the last few years in the form of video, photography, and sculpture. There is a quote I particularly enjoy from the 16th century alchemical text, the Rosarium Philosophorum. Whenever we have spoken openly, we have said nothing, but where we have written something in code and pictures, we have hidden the truth. To me, that encapsulates so much about the practice of occultism. As you can see, the early period of history in the first centuries produced ample material for future occult philosophy. The strains of thought were able to intertwine with each other because they were so similar in their pursuit of the divine. Maybe a bit less so with Gnosticism, but it's still extant in esoteric thought going forward. In particular, the knowledge and texts from Alexandrian alchemists and Hermetic scholars were later transmitted to the Islamic world and medieval Europe in the early Middle Ages. The medieval revival of alchemy in Europe was in part due to the translation of Arabic works into Latin in the 12th century. By the late Middle Ages, alchemy was taken seriously by philosophers, scientists, and theologians, including those in the Church, although that doesn't mean that it wasn't treated with some suspicion by the papacy. The work of alchemists led to the production of hydrochloric acid, nitric acid, potash, and sodium carbonate, and the identification of elements like arsenic, antimony, and bismuth. They also developed laboratory devices and procedures that are still used today. Medieval alchemists aimed to discover the relationship between man and the cosmos, to advance science and medicine, and to discover the divine secret of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is one of those ideas that is both simple and deceptively complex. It's arguably the most important aspect of alchemical practice. The quest for the stone is a symbol of alchemists' quest for divine realization. Perhaps the most important esoteric tradition to rise out of the Middle Ages is a system which is akin to those we have already talked about, but also quite distinct. This is Jewish Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a profound and intricate form of Jewish mysticism, often traced back to the 12th and 13th centuries in Spain and southern France, where it began to coalesce out of older Jewish traditions. Kabbalah delves into the nature of the divine, the structure of the universe, and the role of human beings within this cosmic framework. This desire to understand the oneness of the divine with the universe must be sounding pretty familiar to you by now, right? One of those earlier practices that was united with Kabbalistic practice was Hebrew gematria, which has been traced in its simplest forms back to around 78 BCE, and is first mentioned in Jewish literature in the 2nd century CE. It is an intricate system where numerical values are assigned to letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The studying of the correlation between numbers and letters allows for a kind of meditative state, particularly useful for studying sacred texts like the Torah, where hidden meanings can be revealed through the interrelation between letters and numbers. The Hebrew language lends itself to this study because not only do words have meanings, but letters also have meanings, so combining them adds depth to the meaning yet again. There is also a Greek version of this system called isophacy, which also involves assigning numerical values to words, and it's believed to have been influenced by the Pythagorean tradition that originated in the 6th century BCE. These tables I put here show you the 22 Hebrew letters and the numerical values that go with them. And then underneath, I've actually shown the values for, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, obviously running right to left. You can see the numeric values for each letter and then for each word added up to create a new numerical value. So in the beginning, which is Bereshith, you have 2, 200, 1, 310, 400, and that's brought together to bring 913. And so what you can do is then look for other words which have the value of 913 and contemplate how they might relate to Bereshith. The practice of gematria in Kabbalah is not just about numerical calculations, it's a form of meditation and contemplation that can lead to mystical experiences and a deeper understanding of the universe. It is said that through gematria one can uncover layers of meaning that relate to the cosmic structure of the 10 sephirot, which you can see here on the slide as the circular nodes in the diagram. This diagram is the Esheim, also known in English as the Tree of Life. It's a kind of diagrammatic portrayal of the process through which the divine creates the physical and metaphysical realms. The term sephirot derives from the Hebrew word for spheres and signifies the different attributes of God as they manifest in our world. You will find in later Western esotericism that all sorts of groups of things are laid onto these sephirot to organize their place in creation. For example, planets, pantheons of gods from different systems, even things like plants or gems are ascribed to each sphere. But really, this visualization is mostly to do with the journey of the soul to the divine. And this, again, is an idea which you have no doubt noticed in earlier systems I've discussed. Down at the bottom here, we have Malkuth, which is furthest away from the divine emanation right up at the top in Keter. Malkuth is our material world, but within it we still find a spark of the divine. We can follow a path up this winding ladder of the tree to hopefully experience what is up here in the divine realm known as the supernals in those top three spheres, beyond which are the infinite aspects of the Ein Sof, God without end. This tree can actually be associated with the one found in the Garden of Eden that stands alongside the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, from which Eve picked the apple. In Hermetic and Gnostic traditions, there is the idea that the biblical fall of mankind symbolizes the separation of humanity from the divine. And as you will notice here in this diagram, there is a void between the three supernals and the rest of the tree, which is demarcated by the veil of the abyss. Apart from the emergence of Kabbalah, a lot was happening in the Middle Ages. This included various expressions of mystic Christianity, the Knights Templar coming back from the Crusades with esoteric ideas, and of course the witch trials, which I personally always thought to be more about controlling a population through fear than having that much to do with the occult. I know that many people associate witchcraft with occultism, but personally I see traditional witchcraft as sitting more in the folk magical, natural magic area and running alongside the esoteric systems we're looking at today, but not strictly part of them, although others might quite rightly disagree with that. In the Renaissance period up to the 17th century, occultism found its way into the general intellectual and cultural milieu. Hermeticism and Neoplatonism in particular were championed by polymath academics such as Paracelsus, who integrated science with the esoteric. The early scientists of this era appreciated the interconnectedness of things and so were drawn to philosophies that also supported this idea. Along with his spiritual interests, Paracelsus had a rather revolutionary approach to science, placing an emphasis on observation and testing rather than just on established doctrine, and this made him very effective in his medical discoveries. Naturally, this hybrid scientific approach also lent itself perfectly to alchemy, which continued to flourish with academics across Europe. Something else that really took off in this era and continued to play a major role in occultism going forward was the compiling of magical grimoires. These tended to cover topics like astrology, demonology, angelology, divination, talismanic magic, and other rituals for communicating with spirits. Mostly they deviated from the theurgical or divine practice we have looked at so far, but they still played a big part in the whole esoteric movement. These grimoires were usually compilations of various texts that had been copied from each other, translated from other language, and often had unknown provenance. There certainly weren't any definitive copies of texts in this era. An interesting set of manuscripts compiled into a grimoire are attributed to the biblical King Solomon and came to be known as the Clavicula Solomonis, the Key of Solomon, and the Lemegaton or Lesser Key of Solomon, along with the Ars Notoria and the Testament of Solomon. These are fascinating books, and you can even buy them today, translated from 17th century manuscripts housed in the British Museum. The Lemegaton or Lesser Key of Solomon contains a book called the Goetia, which instructs on summoning and compelling evil spirits described as demons. It is tied to the belief that Solomon was given power over demons by the Archangel Michael and subsequently used this power to enslave a number of them to complete the work of his great temple in Jerusalem. The grimoire itself is a catalogue of 72 demons, each with skills that can be evoked to do things like attain knowledge about a subject, to influence others, to gain something materially, mostly things that are of earthly benefit to the magician, but not always of benefit to others. These images show the sigils of each demon, which could be used to call upon it. You'll find a lot of familiar names there, as horror movies love to grab a suitable demon from this horde when needed. So demons like Belial and Paimon come to mind. When people imagine the occult, I think this is exactly what comes to mind. It's classic ceremonial magic with all the bells and whistles, magical circles, seals, sigils, rings, robes, incantations. It's complex and beautiful in its pageantry. This sort of ritual is designed to overwhelm the senses, to impress the magician, him or herself, as much as whatever spirit is being summoned. The diagram on the left shows the Circle of Solomon. The magician stands within the circle, surrounded and protected by the Hebrew names of God: Adonai, Elohim, and the most holy name, the Tetragrammaton Yod-He-Vav-He, an iteration of 4 Hebrew letters. The spirit is then summoned into the triangle to maintain distance and safety from the magician. Interestingly, demons are never actually mentioned in the Bible in relation to Solomon. The story of the temple is found in apocryphal sources, such as certain versions of the Talmud and in the Testament of Solomon. Considering King Solomon's reign is dated at around 970 to 930 BCE, this is quite significantly prior to the compilation of these books. It's not known if other versions of this particular work are found in the intervening years, but there are many other grimoires from the ancient world involving ritual, ceremony, and the summoning of spirits that definitely do relate to this work. In fact, goes, the root word of goetic, was from the Greek word used to describe sorcerers, diviners, and practical magicians. A big question around these entities is, what are they and do they even exist? This question is relevant not just to weird demons, but to a lot of what goes on in the occult. I suppose early magicians probably did see them as literal demons or evil spirits, whereas later occultists saw them more like aspects of the psyche symbolically represented as these spirits. There is also the question of, does it really matter either way? This can be hard to swallow when you are after definitive truths, but it does tend to be an ongoing theme in Western esotericism, where everything is imbued with multiple aspects and meanings. So here are 4 particularly cool demons. They're always described in really strange ways. My favourite is the one on the far left there with 5 legs. You can just imagine him rolling along. If we now take a look at Elizabethan England around the beginning of the 16th century, there is something interesting going on there that is, in a way, the complete opposite of demonology, but it is still full of the same sorts of questions around what exactly it is. This is Enochian magic. This, in my mind, is even more complex and impressive than anything any of the previous ceremonial grimoires contain, and it came into being seemingly all in one go, fully formed. You may have heard of Queen Elizabeth's first advisor, John Dee. This is Queen Elizabeth I. He was a true polymath with an insatiable thirst for knowledge, being not only a mathematician, astronomer, court astrologer, and spy, but also an occultist. Dee worked closely with a man called Edward Kelly as his scryer, which is a kind of visualizer in esoteric rituals. They had started off with their esoteric experiments, doing the usual thing that occultists do and trying to ascertain knowledge of the universe. Kelly would go into a trance state and used a black obsidian mirror belonging to Dee to receive visions and instructions. Dee would meticulously record everything they did, which is very lucky for us today, as that's how we know so much about what they were doing. At some point, Kelly started to receive a language which, over time, they compiled into a series of texts and tables that outlined a unique alphabet of 21 letters, along with the syntax and grammar to go with it, this resulting in a full language. The entities transferring this information were understood by Dee and Kelly to be angels, and the language came to be known as Enochian in reference to the biblical Enoch. In this image, you can see some of Dee's magical Enochian tools, and you can see those in the British Museum now. So there's the black obsidian mirror at the back and his wax discs at the front, which I'll go into a bit more in a minute. The significance of the Enochian language in the context of Dee and Kelly's work cannot be overstated. It represented a direct line of communication with higher realms and was considered the pure language of angels. In the image, I've shown a piece of the call of the ethers, so you can see the Enochian alphabet, the way it's meant to be pronounced and its English translation. The angels also gave them instructions for making contact and for observing the ethers, a system of 30 realms emanating from a divine centre, all with 3-letter names. In order to make contact, the magician required a number of quite elaborate tools carved and marked with the Enochian language. Probably the most impressive and fascinating of these tools is a large wax disc, which you can see here. This is the Sigillum Deamath, or Seal of God's Truth. 4 smaller versions of the seal sit under the legs of a small table inscribed with Enochian letters, as I've shown here on the slide. I think of these smaller discs as being like isolators, magically separating the table and everything on it from the floor and therefore from the material world. The ritual itself involves chanting and intoning of letters and Enochian keys or calls designed to unlock a gateway to other realms. I've worked with this system myself and it's one of my favourites. The only word I can use to describe it is uncanny. The language is not like anything I've heard, and chanting it can make you feel a bit lightheaded. A friend of mine described the chanting of the letters backwards and forwards and around the table, weaving through the sigillum, to be akin to the movements of a barrel lock clicking, which is one of the best descriptions I've heard. This system was naturally influenced by previous esoteric systems and continues to influence later ones, but it still stands out to me as being singular in the way it works. Jumping forward into the modern era, we see an explosion of interest in the occult. In the 17th century, the mystical movement of Rosicrucianism was formed. Then, in 1854, occultist Eliphas Levi wrote his seminal work, Dogma and Ritual and High Magic, which significantly influenced future occultists. In 1875, the mystical movement of Theosophy was established, and in the 19th century there was significant interest in spiritualism or contacting the dead, which in my mind sits outside Western esoteric history, but was still part of the same groundswell. Artists and poets were also showing an undisguised interest in the occult, with William Blake producing visionary art and poetry, poet W.B. Yeats joining the Golden Dawn, and the artistic symbolist movement arising in France, Britain and Belgium, all in the 19th century. The images on the left are from Eliphas Levi's text. Solomon's seal is a good example of the principle as above, so below. The image of Baphomet is probably the quintessential image associated with the occult, and it often erroneously thought to portray Satan. The character of Baphomet was first recorded in trial transcripts from the Inquisition of the Knights Templar, but this version probably represents an equilibrium of opposites in balance, much like the seal next to it. On the right is a work called Parsifal by symbolist artist John Dee, who I really enjoy, and also Dee was an occultist. One of the most notable occult groups of this time period was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Founded in London in 1888 by 3 Freemasons, it took everything I've talked about so far and consolidated the knowledge into a syllabus with a structured initiation and degree process of Masonry. Now, I haven't mentioned Masonry so far, even though it has a very long history going back to actual stonemasons. This is because it wasn't until esoteric Masonry arose in the 18th century that it started to blend with other esoteric movements. You know how I talked about King Solomon's temple as related to the Goetia? The temple also has great symbolic meaning to Masonic philosophy, as does Christian mysticism, Kabbalah and Hermeticism. Unlike Masonry, the Golden Dawn was open to both sexes, and it attracted many interesting members of British society. This was also a point in history where the West was being more widely exposed to Eastern mysticism, particularly in the form of Buddhism. Yoga and meditation techniques were incorporated into Western esoteric practices of this time, with them melding together quite well. Initiates of the Golden Dawn would pass through various rites and trials to allow them access to the next stage of their journey. They used the Tree of Life as a map of their path. They used gematria, they used Enochian magic, ancient Egyptian symbolism. Initiation was a way to instruct members in the mysteries of the order, with the unknown being an important element in the experience. Secrecy was of utmost importance. Secret societies seem to bother people sometimes, which is strange because most of the time, if you want to know what the secrets are, all you have to do is join the society. Naturally, with so many strong personalities and artistic temperaments involved, the Golden Dawn fell apart after a few years. Out of its implosion came a young man called Aleister Crowley, arguably the single most important occultist of our era. He was a polymath of the same variety I've mentioned previously. As well as his reputation as an occultist, he was a poet, a prolific author, a mountaineer, a skilled chess player, and a painter. His history is very full. There are numerous books written about him, and even more written by him. Crowley took everything he could out of all available esoteric systems from both the West and the East. He travelled widely through Egypt, the Near East and China. He also spent time with a fellow Golden Dawn member studying Buddhism and Hinduism in India, and he had previously been in the Himalayas on mountaineering expeditions, scaling K2 and Kanchenjunga. He wrote books covering many of the practices I have previously described. The Vision and the Voice describes his works growing the Enochian ethers. Liber 777 is a comprehensive collection of Kabbalistic correspondences, plus his interpretation of the Sephiroth and a treatise on gematria. He edited and annotated the modern copy of the Megaton. The majority of his books include alchemical symbolism, hermetic thought, and ceremonial magic. His symbolic pantheon of choice was ancient Egyptian. He took what could be described as a kind of scientific approach to magical practice, coining the phrase, the method of science, the aim of religion, to explain his process. I'm sure it's not as rigorous as the contemporary scientific method, but he sought to prove that his ritual workings could be replicated and that there was a consistency of outcome achievable to anyone. While in Egypt on honeymoon with his wife Rose, he experienced a pivotal moment in his esoteric career. He received a message from a being called Aiwass, who instructed him to write down what was divulged over the course of 3 days. This writing is called Liber Alvel Legis, or the Book of the Law. Although Crowley put it aside and promptly forgot about it, later when he did rediscover the manuscript, it became the basis for his philosophy known as Thelema. Being written in Egypt, this text was heavily influenced by the ancient religion and featured many of its gods and much of its symbolism. The book is in 3 parts and has the voice of 3 characters. The female Nuit representing the endless sea of space, the male Hadit representing the singular seed of creation, and the child Rahu Kuit, an aspect of Horus representing a new way forward. It's really quite poetic. Here again is the question of whether these entities are actual gods or representations of ideas. Crowley himself wavered back and forth on whether he thought Aiwass was a part of his own subconscious or some sort of independent entity. In his writing, Crowley questioned whether parallel universes could house parts of ourselves that exist elsewhere. Here is the stele of Ankh-Afnakhonsu, an Egyptian priest, showing the body of Nuit arched over the winged disc of Hadit. Underneath is Horus conversing with the priest Ankh-Afnakhonsu. These 2 cards are both from the Thoth Tarot deck Crowley conceived with his friend the artist Lady Frida Harris. On the left is a representation of the composite god Heru-Ra-Ha in his double form as Rahu Kuit, a warrior, the aspect of force and motion, seated on a throne. Around him the lambent form of Horpakrat or Hippocrates in the Greek, the silent one or our secret self. You can also see both Nuit and Hadit in this image. Then on the right, not forgetting our friend Hermes Trismegistus, here he is as the Magus. I would have liked to see him as Jehuti, as I really love Jehuti, but if you look at his right hand, it appears he is juggling a staff with an ibis head. Out of the book of the law comes the credo, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will. Contrary to popular belief, will is not the same as want. This is not do what you want. In fact, this is the opposite in many cases. The basic idea of will is that each human moves throughout the universe on a path that does not impede or disrupt any other. To do what thou will means to follow this path, which should result in one achieving self-realization. In a more metaphysical Hermetic sense, the will can allow one to experience the universe and the interconnectedness of all things. After the dissolution of the Golden Dawn, Crowley sought to construct his own teaching order, rather enigmatically named the AA. This order followed the esoteric tradition of attempting to comprehend the divine and is still extant today. He also took over leadership of an order called the OTO, or Ordo Templi Orientis, also extant today. These were the two main bodies through which Crowley expressed his ideas. He had named his new philosophy Thelema, the Greek word for will, and incorporated these somewhat new ideas within those of the esoteric tradition and worked them into his two orders. It has to be said that Crowley was a complex character and not always the nicest person. Scandals and drama followed him around, numerous love affairs, accusations of demon worship, and he was also terrible with money, having spent his family fortune on mountaineering trips. Despite all his failings, he was an astonishing person and I admire him greatly. Being human and imperfect isn't a reason to reject his work. After all, the magic is in the practice, not in the person. People should be seen as human and with all that might entail. In my opinion, nobody should be made into a perfect guru or be seen as better than others. Whether people love him or hate him, it's hard to describe the profound impact Crowley had on modern occultism. The Western esoteric tradition has a long history. As you can see, it's still around today. While there isn't the same overlap between science and the occult now as there once was, there are still echoes of the tradition. Around the 2nd century BCE, a man called Democritus traced all experiential phenomena back to the movements and changing combinations of minute particles, which he called atoms, or indivisible in Greek. There was no way to observe or prove this magical theory for hundreds of years, but the concept floated around in esoteric circles until science had time to prove it. In the 20th century, scientists succeeded in the transmutation of elemental structures through bombarding the nuclei with high-energy particles. By bombarding Mercury-196 with neutrons, it can be converted into gold-197. The alchemists would have been proud. I find myself overwhelmed by the staggering beauty of the universe and need some way to express it. I tend to find an outlet in art. I thought I'd show this body of work because it is so very obviously inspired by the alchemical drawings I've been showing you. These are miniature, which is a deviation from how I usually worked, which is in large format moving image pieces, video photography. This piece also bears the name, "When we have spoken openly, we have said nothing," which is a quote I used earlier on. There are two pieces of writing here that I want to juxtapose. The first from one of the greatest astrophysicists, the incomparable Carl Sagan, and the second from one of the greatest occultists of all time, Aleister Crowley. They both reveal the naked splendour of existence in different ways, but I don't think they are really so far apart. So this first one from Carl Sagan. The cosmos is full beyond measure of elegant truths, of exquisite interrelationships, of the awesome machinery of nature. The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. I can't help thinking that the early Kabbalists would have really loved that. The second is a poem called At Sea from Aleister Crowley. Perhaps think of this in relation to the goddess Nuit as the vast cosmic sea. At night hath stars more rare than ships, in ocean faint from pole to pole, so all the wonder of her lips hints her innavigable soul. Such lights she give as guide my bark, but I am swallowed in the swell of her heart's ocean, sagely dark, that holds my heaven and holds my hell. In her I live, a mote minute, dancing a moment in the sun. In her I die, a sterile shoot of nightshade in oblivion. In her myself dissolves, a grain of salt cast careless in the sea. My passion purifies my pain to peace past personality. Love of my life, God grant the years, confirm the chrism rose to rood, anointing love's asperging tears in sanctifying solitude. Man is so infinitely small in all these stars determinate, maker and moulder of them all. Man is so infinitely great.